Hello, friends. Good morning. Welcome to Park Boulevard Presbyterian Church. Today is Sunday, March 21st, 2021. Good to have you with us. Glad that you can be here on this fifth Sunday of Lent. We're continuing on in the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 11 today. It's the story of the raising of Lazarus from the dead. One of the difficult things about growing up is coming to terms with death and loss. Often our first encounters with death have to do with our pets. Ask any older child about what pets they've had, and there's a good chance you'll hear something like this. I had a hamster named Snowflake, but she died. That word in the middle, but, tells us that as children, we see this as exceptional, as surprising. As adults, we probably think, well, of course she died. That's what hamsters do, right? But as a child, we still carry with us the thought that life isn't supposed to be interrupted or abruptly ended like this. This is, of course, so much more true if the loss is of a human being, of a family member, a loved one. This is not how it's supposed to be. How often have we wished that we could turn back the hands of the clock, reversing time and undoing the tragic loss that we've experienced? Well, today we're going to look at a story in which Jesus apparently does just that. So this is John chapter 11, starting with verse 1. It's kind of a long passage, so I'll be skipping some sections. Hear the word of the Lord. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill, so the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. In verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. And Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus began to weep. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Well, Lazarus' family had a strong sense that Lazarus could be healed if Jesus could just get there in time. They sent this message to Jesus, who was some distance away. "Please, come, Lazarus is sick." When Jesus got the message about Lazarus' illness, however, he decided to remain right where he was for another couple of days. He finally heads out on the long journey to Bethany, and upon arrival there, he finds out that Lazarus has died. Martha, Lazarus' sister, the one who's very inclined towards action, cannot wait for Jesus to arrive, but goes out to meet Jesus on the road. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died," she says. "You could have prevented this. If only you'd been here sooner, when you were needed. We sent for you. What took so long?" There's a very interesting wording here in verses 5 and 6. In the original Greek, after Jesus says that this illness will not lead to death, but will be for the glory of God, the NRSV Bible says, "Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, he stayed 2 more days." But in the Greek, it literally says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Therefore, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was." Did you catch that? It wasn't in spite of the fact that he loved them, that he stayed, he delayed 2 days. It was because he loved them that he delayed. Jesus loved them, therefore he stayed 2 more days before he set out. We may wonder at times why God doesn't answer our prayers in just the way that we ask or think that he should. I'm sure that this is what Martha was thinking when she came out to meet Jesus. "We needed you, and we sent for you, and we told you what we needed." But there is a purpose behind Jesus' actions, or in this case, his lack of action, that serves a greater purpose of demonstrating God's power and Jesus' own mission in the world. Raising Lazarus from the dead is the greatest miracle that Jesus performed up to this point, the most powerful demonstration of God's power flowing through Jesus. There's a pervasive sense of love throughout this passage. Not only is love the motivation for Jesus to delay his trip to Bethany, but when he arrives, he's overwhelmed by the sense of loss for both the family and for himself. When Jesus sees Mary weeping amid a crowd of mourners who are also weeping, Jesus is greatly disturbed in his spirit. He's deeply moved. And then, when he goes to the tomb, Jesus begins to weep. Now, this verse 35, is famous for being the shortest verse in the Bible. Many Bibles simply just say, "Jesus wept." 2 words. More accurate to say that Jesus began to weep, but even then, we don't necessarily get the sense of it. Jesus isn't just crying here. Perhaps the best way to capture the emotion of the moment would be to say, Jesus burst into tears. Jesus was overcome by emotion. Jesus is so moved by what has happened, the death of someone that he personally knew and loved, a good friend, as well as by the pain and loss experienced by the sisters, whom Jesus also loves deeply. This passage and this verse have been used over the centuries to demonstrate Jesus' humanity over against those who would focus exclusively on his divinity. Jesus was a real flesh and blood human being with real human emotions. He wasn't just a pure spirit who was above and beyond the messiness of human life and tragedy. But this actually doesn't go far enough, because one of Jesus' chief purposes in the world was to show the world what God is really like. We already know that God is holy and righteous and powerful, but these are not necessarily good news for people who are not necessarily very holy or righteous ourselves. In fact, it might actually be bad news if this God was not on our side. But Jesus shows us something far different. Jesus has already said, I and the Father are one. Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. Here we see that the love that Jesus has for people, a love that leaves him deeply moved and disturbed in spirit, a love that causes him to be overcome with emotion and to even burst into tears, a love that experiences the pain of empathy when someone he loves experiences pain and loss, and a love that causes him also to experience pain and loss over the death of someone that he loves deeply. Here we see what God is like. God shares our pain when we experience loss, and God experiences pain when we ourselves are hurting and are lost. Through Jesus, we see what we might describe as the humanity of God. Yes, the humanity of God. That God is not detached, aloof, and far away, but that God is with us, and his heart is broken by our pain. Well, finally, Jesus comes to the tomb. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And in that Mediterranean climate, that meant that the body would already have begun to decompose and to decay. But Jesus has the people roll the stone away from the tomb. And then he does a curious thing. He prays and he gives thanks to God for having heard him, for having already heard him. It's as if God the Father has already answered his prayer. And maybe he has. For with the stone rolled away from the tomb, there likely is no stench of death there. The miracle has already occurred, and Jesus merely has to call Lazarus forth from the tomb. What a sight that would have been. Lazarus emerging from the dark tomb, still like a mummy, wearing the burial strips wrapped all around his body. But rather than the walking dead, Lazarus is very much alive. We can imagine the shock and the joy that resulted, even though it's not really described here in the passage. The return to life and health for Lazarus, the restoration of their lost brother for Mary and for Martha, the powerful sign for the community that someone who is undeniably dead and was publicly mourned is now alive and well. And we must not forget that the joy that Jesus must have experienced, not only for having his friend back, but in having his prayer answered. It's a wonderful story, but it's a singular event. There were many other tombs and many other dead people probably very close by, but Lazarus was the only one who was raised. And like the healings that Jesus performed, this resurrection was not permanent. Lazarus was restored to health, but presumably he went on to live his life as one susceptible to illness and eventually to death, like the rest of us. It's important for us to see this event for what it essentially is, and that's as a sign. This is the final sign in a series of signs in John's gospel, all pointing to who Jesus is and what Jesus is going to do on the cross. Everything that has happened is so that people will believe in Jesus. And now Jesus demonstrates that his words are true. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. This Jesus, this man, has the power of life in his hands. The final sign will be his own death and his own resurrection that will take place shortly in the story of the gospel. But this resurrection will be different, because this time it won't merely be a reversal of death and an extension of life. Rather, it will be the passing through death to the new life on the other side. The resurrection of Jesus will be the overcoming and the defeat of death. This is the resurrection that he promises when he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And he follows it up with a question. Do you believe this? Do you believe that I am the resurrection and the life? Friends, this raising up, as with all of the amazing things that God does in our lives, are perhaps incredible blessings to us, but even more so, they are a sign to us and to all who witness what is going on in our lives, that God is at work, that God is doing something greater, that Jesus is the resurrection and the life, that for all who put their faith in him, that even if they die, they will experience life and life everlasting. Friends, this is the story of Lent. This is the story of Easter, the final overcoming and the defeat of death. This is what Jesus came in the world for, to give us life abundantly, and to show us that the nature of God, the true and deepest heart of God, is a heart filled with love. Love that wants us to live and to never be separated from him. Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. Do you believe this? Blessings to you, friends. Have a wonderful and blessed week.